This is season 7 of Voices of CX podcast, still bringing you the best thought leaders, practitioners, and academics of the industry, but this time with a renewed focus on the human touch. Empathy is our key word, and we're going all out on discussing how conversations can reshape experiences and your business inside and out. No matter how big your business is, what your challenges are, or your industry, connecting with your customers and their decisions is essential to leading through empathy. So we're back with one more episode of Voices of CX podcast. We are on season 7, and today's guest is a very special guest because this person is fully customer success, and we've never had a fully customer success guest on here. So I'm excited about today. We have David Sakamoto, VP of Customer Success at GitLab. Hey, David.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for joining. I'm excited to be the first customer success person. I definitely think there's a blurred definition nowadays between CX and CS. So right. I'm thankful for the opportunity to connect with your audience.
How do you feel about that? Are you mostly like, no, I don't do customer experience. I do customer success. Or do you just let it go because it doesn't really matter?
No, I think it's definitely blurred. In some ways, I look at CS is having responsibility for that. So I think if you think about the old world, CX oftentimes is in marketing, other things like, and I think CS, maybe I'm a little biased, but in some ways is operationalizing that in terms of all of our touch points. I definitely look at customers as they go through their journey. So customer success is really around helping customers manage their journey of adoption and ultimately driving to an outcome. And depending on the CS organization, most likely they have touch points across all points in that journey. So, I think a key focus for CS leaders should be ensuring that is smooth in terms of that overall experience in driving and delivering value to your customers.
So tell me a little bit about your background, how you got to customer success to begin with. Did you plan out your career? I am going to be in customer success, and you followed that path, or was it something that just kind of naturally happened and you embraced it?
Absolutely not. So I probably won't be, no one's going to be writing a career planning book with me as the center of that. So I try to relate it more towards the TV show Kung Fu, where you're just kind of wandering through the going through your journey and you come across different adventures. And so that was definitely my career, and come from an industrial engineering background, which I think is important because I think it really helped build a systems view of how to bring things together. But I did as a process engineer. So how do you define process, the things that are to scale? And I then moved into program management, which is how do you kind of bring together disparate groups to do something in CS, to drive value, whether it's all the different parts of the organization. I moved into a startup, so did some services. So you kind of build that, that passion for customers, and in professional service, you go through great services. People just go through walls or any barrier to ensure that customers are getting what they need. And then ran operations and moved into large corporate experience. So I worked at Cisco running operations, and I even ran an engineering team. So it's I've had all these eclectic backgrounds in process, and you're a program manager, professional services, development, in operations. And so I often joke, if it wasn't for customer success, I would be totally hosed, because I even had an interview one time and someone's like, what are you? Are you an ops person? Are you an engineering person? Are you, but I think as it relates to my current role, I found that everything that I did ultimately related to a customer. So I ultimately had passion around a customer and just kind of built a bunch of skills that I think are very applicable, in the sense that you have to know, you have to build that product. We talked about the touch points and building out a process that scales. And in customer success, you're orchestrating across all of these different resources between sales and product and we have TAMs, but CSMs, in services or in partners. So like you're kind of organizing groups. So that program management comes into play. The services mindset, clearly, operations being able to build and scale. So startup experience and large corporate experience, knowing how to build, but also having a North Star of what scaling looks like. And obviously, engineering and being able to partner closely with product teams and engineering teams is super important.
Yeah.
Because I definitely think that most of success comes from the product experience, and so we're kind of wrapping the general customer experience. That kind of ties the CX stuff to build that overall experience to drive value. So
Yeah. It's interesting because I've been working in tech for a while, and I meet a lot of engineers. I meet very few that are actually doing engineering. It's always something that's process related. And that's actually pretty interesting to me, that kind of traditional engineering education prepares people so well for process management and project management. Do you see the same thing, or am I like stuck in a weird bubble?
no, yeah, I definitely, and again, I'm a little bit biased because this is my background, but I definitely think, at least for me, especially industrial engineering, it's to give you that real kind of that systems view,
Hmm.
which is very much aligned to me. And I tell my team, like, hey, I'm a context person. If I don't understand the big picture, I will flail, right? So I
Hmm.
need to always understand the big picture before we get into the specifics. So I think it gives you that. I think the logical aspect of how to build process, there's like a sequence of things. In modern engineering, you have to iterate, right? So you're
Right.
taking a lot of those agile practices and how do you iterate. So, I definitely value it. But I would also say that there's very successful customer success leaders that don't come from an engineering background. And I think it largely depends on the product set or the domain that you're working with. I've always been in
Hmm.
really technical products too, so that engineering background is helpful. But
Do you think
I,
that like an analytical mindset is necessary though?
I do, yeah. I mean, especially with modern customer success. So I definitely think data driven, using digital everywhere is really helpful to really be able to look at, okay, what's working, what's not, whether it's small things, small process like a playbook, but ultimately you're driving to those ultimate outcomes of
Hmm.
product adoption, but you also have a commercial mindset around driving that net retention or net dollars,
Yeah.
net
Now,
dollar growth.
interesting question here. Is customer success something that's exclusive to B2B?
No, absolutely not. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm definitely focused on B2B, but in many ways, I actually look at B2C has informed a lot of B2B. So if you look at digital, right, a lot of consumer products, like that's all you have. So a lot of those same approaches, strategy you'd use for B2C, I view as we're applying those now to B2B. And in
Hmm.
certain ways, also, there's, for our approach, we're not looking at digital just in terms of the long tail.
Hmm.
Over time, I think there's customers who would prefer it, right? I don't want your health check meeting, right? Just give me the information I want. And the smarter we get of leveraging the data that comes from adoption, from sentiment, from uh, support, all these sensing mechanisms, if you get really smart around that, you can learn how to bring the right information at the right time and to optimize on your value that you deliver to your customers.
Hmm. Yeah. Because in my mind, as I'm basically illiterate when it comes to your field, but I always imagine that B2C is like customer service and then B2B is customer success. And I understand that that may be an incorrect point of view, but I think others share it. And what do you feel about that right there?
Yeah, I look at it as more how do you engage?
Hmm.
And I think most will segment according to economics. Like big customers, you get more white glove. Small customers, you get little. I don't agree with that either. I think it's whatever the customer is best suited for the customer.
Hmm.
So I don't look at them as I look at them as very blurred. And ultimately, you want to align. It's just different types of your engagement approach to what's going to work best for your customer.
Hmm.
I definitely see, in our business B2B, there's a lot of very technical customers that would just prefer to just get the information. So you're kind of directing them to content and feeding the right information at the right time versus setting up, multiple check-in meetings and health checks and stuff like that where people just don't have time and don't want to do it.
So when you lead a customer success team that essentially has an almost DIY product where it's not, the company isn't providing a service. The buyer has to execute the service themselves. In that case, is a lot of customer success, does it revolve around education and material and
Absolutely. I
resources?
mean, I think it somewhat depends, but I think a lot of what we are doing in customer success is that enablement,
Hmm.
right? So whether you're onboarding, in some ways, your onboarding is like you're just like onboarding oftentimes is enabling on the product, but just here's how to engage with this. Here's how you do enhancement. Here's how you open support. So it's really onboarding them and enabling them to work with, in our sense, GitLab
Mm-hmm.
to get the most value and accelerate that process.
Hmm. That's
But
awesome.
certainly, as you get to use case adoption, you want to make sure you're driving the right use cases. You're helping them specifically for their needs or the barriers that run into. But there's a huge part about enablement. And I think another important piece is you're also not replacing like services, whether it's professional service or managed services. So there's a certain kind of thing you want to kind of keep aligned that we're not doing hands on keyboard. If you need like someone to do some of that work, we bring our services or partners in to help with that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's cool. So let's talk a little bit about one of the most essential portions of your job, which is managing customer expectations. So when the customer arrives in an organization, they've been previously conditioned by the organization's sales and marketing departments. Before that, they've been subjected to advertising, to everything that the market is putting out, the expectations that the market is putting out. So they already arrive at the table with a whole set of expectations. And your job is to manage those and make sure there aren't any gaps. How do you do this? What is the very best way, like the foolproof? I don't know if there is a foolproof way, but if there is, something that you've learned and that you apply in your team that really helps manage those expectations.
Yeah, it's a great question, and if you can find the magic solution that works for everything, I would love to hear it. I don't think it exists, but I would love to hear it. But yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to your original question on CX and
Mm,
in that journey, right? Because marketing is ultimately there's just different layers of expectations. I have market or industry expectations before they may even engage with your company, and then we're going to send out a marketing message that aligns to certain values of a solution. And when engaged with, great, we got them interested. They're going to engage with the sales rep. Then they're going to apply what's the thing that customer is looking to solve in terms of priority, and what is their future vision. So it's again more expectations. And when the first deal gets done, then for what we do in customer success, so many have heard it as the success plan. So that's
mm,
ultimately around how do I take those expectations during sales, and we do a command plan for that. We actually map it as part of our account planning. It flows right into our success plan in terms of what are the positive business outcomes you're seeking, and which are the use cases you're looking to adopt to do that. And in the success plan, we actually wrap that around in terms of, great, let's figure this out in terms of those objectives. Let's drill down into more detail. What's that action plan look like? Who needs to be involved? What's the timing for that? And what are your priorities? And then it's a matter of that CSM or TAM in our GitLab world is managing that whole process and that journey. So it kind of ties. It's funny that interesting very much ties to that CX is around. One way to look at it is the experience, but also your ability to manage those expectations through the
yeah.
whole journey.
Oh yeah. I full on agree with you there. Now, do you ever feel that there is you're constantly working to break down mistaken expectations that have been built before, either by marketing? I'm a marketer here, so you can talk bad about me, it's okay. Or the sales team. There are so many organizations, maybe not your own, but for sure on the market, that overpromise in order to close a deal, and then when it comes down to it, it's like, well, that's not actually how it is. I imagine that a lot of that responsibility rests on your shoulders, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't see it at GitLab often.
Hmm.
Luckily, because we have a revenue leadership team that believes in that journey and
Mhm.
believes in sell the deal, but sell it. Our Mike Pyle, our VP of Enterprise, talks to his team about landing with vision. So like landing, but not it's not just to land, is like what is their future vision and how do we align to that and how can we build a successful journey for them.
Mm-hmm.
What we see at GitLab is oftentimes more the sponsor. It's like a change of sponsor, so we lose a little bit of that champion that's going to help us, message that and drive those priorities within the organization. I definitely seen that other issue though in prior lives. I call it if you think of land, adopt, expand, renew. I've been at other companies where I called it land and leave, right? And they're just looking to get the deal. And it's oftentimes you kind of a little bit more of that perpetual software or perpetual product mindset where I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm done. I got my money, right? Bye. You can work with support from now
Put
on.
them on
So
auto renew and just hope that they don't look at
yeah,
those
so
charges.
I think as you see more progressive, and I would put I'm using revenue on purpose, but people in CS is part of that, at least in our the part of the revenue organization at GitLab. But I think you get more progressive leaders, and they see that, and they know if they don't set this deal up properly, they're not going to get the expansion that you want
Right.
long term.
Yeah. And so how do you do it at GitLab? Because here at Worthix, we have weekly meetings between marketing, sales, and customer success, where customer success is like, no, you cannot promise that. That is not something that you're going to do. And it really helps. It really helps because I am a marketer, but I am also a strong believer in authentic marketing, and that if you sell the wrong thing, you're just going to lose them anyway. So, Worthix isn't that kind of company that's so siloed off that each department doesn't care about the success of the other. So
Yeah.
we manage, this was a strategy that we created internally to break down those silos, which is have all three teams communicate on a constant basis and deliver a unified front to customers. How did you guys do it?
Yeah. So we've uh, taken a slightly different approach, but I think ultimately you're talking about like product market fit and how do I hit, get the right message, and we're selling the right solution and setting the right expectations. We've somewhat done it through a couple of things that we've mapped out the journey. So we know if customers come at entry point with a couple of our solutions. So we have a single application for all the DevOps capabilities. And so we know we want to bring customers into a certain entry points. So for us, it's source code management or CI. That we land there, we know we can be successful, and then we build on that success and expand out. So we typically don't have the problem where we're setting wrong expectations, but it's really around our focus is really around what is the customer's goal,
Mm-hmm.
and what's the use case that we need to drive for that, and what's the right engagement, and getting them set and progressing on that adoption journey so we can drive to the value and ultimately the outcome. So we're very much centered on a couple assets. Is what's the journey that we want to drive, what are the playbooks to ensure that they're successful with the use cases they've selected, and then how do we kind of help customers continue to progress and educate? So your question on enabling them, educating them on additional capabilities will add value, and then helping them buy in, get the organizational buy-in, and then we move and take the next step in terms of expanding the value footprint.
Now, do you believe that this mindset exists at GitLab because of leadership, or is this something that's already a very deep part of the culture, just happens naturally? Do you believe that it would be different if you had a different type of leadership in place?
So I'm going to give you yes to all the statements you said. So I definitely think um, it is leadership, but I think ultimately it comes down to our values. So we take our GitLab core values very seriously, and they're connected, right? So you can have values, but if leadership isn't role modeling them, not educate, not building that into our processes, the value, the culture and values change.
Mhm.
So for us, things like iteration and transparency, we are the hyper transparent. So if anyone wants to know, everything that we do effectively is open to the public in terms of our processes, pretty much everything except for financial data, customer data, security related data, but everything else we're pretty open. And it's pretty scary, kind of not coming from that. And I'm a pretty transparent guy before this, and our customers really value things like that. And
Mm.
if we have issues, we're very forward. If we run into technical problems, it's totally open. Everybody can see what we're working on. They can actually contribute to the issues. So things like that really play an important role into the customer success motion, but also the customer experience.
Yeah.
So, I'm a big person of your culture and values are going to drive that experience,
Yeah.
because ultimately they're people, right?
Yeah.
And they're
Always.
engaging your customers, and they're the ones that are making people are making hundreds or even thousands of decisions every day. And if you're aligned on those core values of what you want that experience to be, people are going to be making the right decisions, also bringing their own creativity and passion into that engagement.
Yeah. How much do you think relies on having empathy with your customer? So not only mapping out your personas and designing the journey, but being truly empathetic to a point where you understand the customer's pains, you understand their values, you understand their needs and how you fit into that journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the most important thing. And in customer success, hiring is probably one of the key challenges because it's as a practice, it's reasonably new, comparative to like a sales or marketing. So finding people with that blend that we talked about, the skill set between ops and engineering, but I it's hard to find people with all of those skills. You're kind of finding pieces and really teaming. What I would say is common across all the team is that empathy,
Hmm.
because I think that really comes across if you care. You're going to ask the right questions. You're going to listen. You're getting really good at discovery. You get better at enablement because you're actually appreciating and understanding their situation and their environment and their, as you mentioned, their culture and values. So that empathy, I think, is a superpower for CS, team members, CS leaders. And I think it's also kind of going back to our common discussion on CX. It's also bringing that empathy and care into the organization. So how do you operationalize that into the business and making sure that that integrates into the broader organization?
Mhm. Now tell me a little bit about where that engineering, David, comes into play when it comes to that roadmap that you build with you a success plan, right? So let's get into that success plan a little bit because it seems to be your secret sauce of how to manage a customer success department.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a good success plan is sets up the journey. And what I see it is symbolic of it's a collaborative, shared agreement on what we're going to do together to drive the business outcomes for you, customer.
Mm.
And so I think that sets the whole framework, and everything aligns that. And we talked about that. Part of that process is defined during marketing with the messages. Part of
Mhm.
it's in sales, so it's part of that journey. But the success plan is really the roadmap. It's like the project. If you think of a traditional project plan, you're trying to achieve something. There's a certain set of actions that need to be done. There's certain people that need to do them. There's certain risk and issues that need to be managed. That's effectively like a success plan for a customer of like, here's a product adoption journey that you're going to define to achieve your objectives. Now,
Mm.
everything you set up is for that, right? So great. We're doing our check-ins. We do an EBR. It's really everything's measuring against that plan. So, I ultimately think that's a really good asset that we can together bring to the customer and to their sponsors to show here's our plan. You sign this agreement. Here's how we're going to deliver the value.
Mhm. And is there we talked about in our pre-call, we talked about the importance of setting up milestones along the way and what that does even on a psychological level for customers, right? You get
Yeah,
into that a little bit too?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for us, we think of what's the positive business outcome
Mhm.
and how do you measure that, right? So we try to get to an outcome measure. So say, some people will say, "Oh, I just want to implement this thing." Like, for what? Right?
Mm.
Generally it's going to be, you want to save money, you want to move more quickly, you want to be more secure. So generally the really powerful conversations and really where you bring that partnership and collaboration, by the way, is one of our values. So that partnership and collaboration, and I've seen a couple EBRs that just totally bring it to the right place where we're talking about, okay, we had a customer tell me one time, like, hey, we want to do a planning session with you, being in your like annual planning. because this is so great because we're aligned around here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to measure success in your measures against
Hmm.
deploying this technology and increase, like for example, we want to increase security coverage of our testing, shifting left in the development process. We set up specific measures around that. It brings the conversation to a whole new level. And when we talk about engagement, you want to get to a more senior level. And if you're actually talking about business outcomes, you earn the opportunity to have the conversation with those folks, those people.
Yeah. How interesting is it to kind of dig a little bit deeper and actually answer the why questions? Because a lot of this is what, right? What the final goal is and how you're going to get there, but truly understanding why they need to get there. Is
Yeah,
that is there value in that?
absolutely. And that comes from that empathy, that discovery that we talked about. And I think in funny, we just finished SCO, and one of the sessions was the 5 whys.
Hmm.
Why, to ultimately get to that root problem they're trying to solve, or get to the real measurable outcome.
Hmm.
And so I think that's really, because oftentimes people haven't really thought through it, right? Oh, I need to implement this thing. Oftentimes the person that bought it is different than the person that's deploying it. It's like, I don't know, I got
Yeah.
told I got told to go do this thing.
Yeah.
So getting, in some ways you have to kind of make sure that you're connecting the dots between the two, because ultimately, if you think of an EBR that's going to be in 3 or 6 months, you want to bring that person that originally drove the deal,
Yeah.
and you want to make sure that you're speaking in their language. So it definitely is a talent, because sometimes the level that you're working at may not have that articulation. So you need to sometimes kind of manage your stakeholder map to make sure that you have a robust success plan, robust definition of what those goals are.
That's awesome. David, what are some of the tools that you have been very successful with that you think that our listeners could maybe benefit from using as well? I don't know, some cool stuff in your stack.
In our stack, so it's systems and tools, like,
Yeah.
yeah. So we use Gainsight.
Hmm.
That's probably the core application. We use, Salesforce, Gainsight. We very much use GitLab. So, with our product, the value is it allows a lot of collaboration in a very transparent way. So if you think of DevOps, the key point is like that collaboration. So, the key things, we use Salesforce, we use our own product, have shared projects with our customers, and then Gainsight. And Gainsight helps us bring the data in, and helps. We're using the digital capabilities. So we have a digital journey, and then we also have our high touch. So we manage all customers within Gainsight, and that's been going really well.
Hmm. Do you still meet maybe peers and colleagues that are, people who don't work at GitLab but are in the same space that still don't use CRMs to do their job? I mean, at this point, it kind of sounds like a weird question, but I have met individuals who are like, no, we don't use CRMs.
I do talk to a lot of CS leaders. I haven't run into that doesn't have a CRM, so that would be, I can respect it if you're
Like, do you
really
have any
early
like
stage.
CRM rebels? They're just like, no.
I'm not going to use this. I love my spreadsheets. We're just going to use, Access database. I haven't. It would be, I think, really tricky to scale, because ultimately, I do think, to our other point, having data-driven experiences and really being able to instrument and measure your journey is super important. And if you're doing
Mhm.
it a bunch in spreadsheets and stuff, it's just really
Yeah.
challenging to scale.
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked is because the other day someone asked a question on Twitter and it was, "Hey, Mary, can you define CRM?" And I got like tossed into 20 years ago and I was like, "What? We're still discussing the value of CRM?" So I was curious to know whether this was still a practice. By your reaction, I'm going to say, not really, not
I
really.
don't see that often, but I still even get shocked. There's people don't even have like chat type of things, and they're still doing like teleconference calls. So there's folks across various points of the spectrum. I haven't run across a lot of leaders that don't have a CRM. That's pretty, it's table stakes to me.
What's the name of that super clunky video conferencing technology that people used to WebEx? WebEx.
Please
Somebody
don't
the
get
other day asked me if I was going to go on a WebEx, and I was like, Excuse me, sir,
I
who are you?
I was just before GitLab, I was at Cisco, so I got to keep my corporate my alumni loyalty to WebEx. But yeah, I think Zoom's definitely
So I wanted to end this by asking if you have any material, anything that you can recommend to our listeners to help them do better at their customer success, or really just bring a little bit of value and kind of a tangible approach to what we discussed today.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I mentioned GitLab's transparency. So
Mhm.
I'd recommend not only for customer success, but for if you're interested in sales or finance or people ops, everything that all of our processes are all written down in the handbook. It's one of our just operational principles. We write everything down. All of our processes are documented, and they're all totally open, including templates. So, for customer success, we want to look about what is our onboarding process and what is our escalation process? What do our playbooks look like? All of that is totally open. So I definitely recommend there if it's helpful. But again, it's beyond, it's all, our entire company is there. So that would be one of my recommendations.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been so great to have someone that's CS through and through, to bring this, I'm going to say, really empathetic approach to dealing with customers. And I do believe that it is the essence of any successful customer journey. So it was great hearing the same thing from you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I definitely agree. The empathy, systems view, align to the customer outcomes and build a plan to go drive and deliver to those and manage it. So, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's exciting to be the first CS person on your show. So hopefully it goes well and people enjoy it, and hopefully they can have a couple takeaways.
Yeah, if people hate it, I just won't bring any more CS people. Then you'll be
No,
first and the
no.
last.
It'll take me all of my CS colleagues are going to be mad if that happens.
Awesome, David. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
That's our show. Thanks for joining us. We hope we've brought you one step closer to leading through empathy. It's our way of making the world a better place, one business at a time. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell if you want to know as soon as we publish a new episode. Voices of CX is brought to you by Worthix. I'm Mary Drummond. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, edited and co-produced by Steve Barry. See you next week.